President Biden recently directed the U.S. Department of Education to extend the freeze on federal student loan payments for an additional 6 months. His long-term agenda also calls for canceling up to $10,000 in student loan debt for each person who borrowed that money. He's also calling for tuition-free public college and more. Joining us on the program today to discuss the effects that this might have on each person and on the economy, Professor Richard Wolff, host of Economic Update, also an author of several books, including the most recent, The Sickness is the System. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Juliana. Glad to be here.
Well, this is kind of an interesting thing. The activists were hoping $50,000 per borrower would be canceled. Biden is tinkering around, seeing if he can do a $10,000 forgiveness plan. What are your thoughts on this idea in the first place?
Well, let me put it this way. I like to get into this issue by starting at the beginning, and namely asking, what kind of a society is it that says to young people, able and willing to give years of their time to develop their education, their skills, their competence, their capability of contributing to the society for the bulk of their adult life? They're willing to do that. That's a very good thing for any society, to have people getting that kind of quality education, because the rest of their lives in their jobs, they'll be giving back to the community that helped educate them. In many societies, that's how it's understood. And therefore, here comes the punchline. The idea of requiring these young people who are going to be doing this valuable contribution to society to go into tens of thousands of dollars of debt to be hanging over them like a sword of Damocles, this is crazy. And in case you're wondering, let me give you an example. At my last count, 8 of the European countries, 8 of them, starting with the biggest and most important of them economically, Germany, have eliminated all tuition and all school fees. To get a college education in Germany costs you nothing. You still have to pay your room and board, your upkeep of your body and your mind, but you do not pay fees. And the Germans are so convinced of the value of this that they make that available not just to German citizens, but to anyone who comes to Germany, wants a student visa. You can go to college. It will cost you nothing. And their reasoning, they're very upfront. We think many of these people will stay in Germany and they will then contribute. And that's a real benefit for Germany, because I'm going to take as an example, somebody comes from Nigeria. It's Nigeria that's paid for that young man or woman's education up until they get to college. So all of the costs of getting them ready for college are borne by the Nigerian community, but it's the German community that gets the benefit of those who decide, maybe because they got married or because their lives changed, to stay in Germany, which is a healthy number of them. I mean, if that's happening in Germany, a close ally of the United States, what exactly is the justification for imposing that? I find that craziness. So let me say that first. So number 2, it follows, of course, that I would like to see us get rid of this indenture for students, this almost encouraging students. And I don't know how many there are, and I'm not sure any data could capture this, but I would like to know how many young people sitting around the kitchen table with their parents talking about going to college or not are dissuaded because the family, especially now, doesn't have the money to pay, and those young people don't want to go and borrow the money because of the debt that it'll mean, because of the fact they'll often need a counter-signature from their parents that puts them at risk. I mean, this is an awful mess up of a way to handle higher education. So I'm in favor of it all. But I do have to say one thing which may make some of your viewers upset with me. If you're going to give an amnesty, you're basically going to say, forget 10,000 or forget 50,000. You're saying something very painful to the people who have done without all kinds of things in their lives because they didn't want to accumulate this kind of debt, who forewent marriage, who forewent children, who never bought a house, things they might have done if they let the debt accumulate, but they didn't. We ask people to have that mentality. We teach our children not to get loaded up with debt. Those who behave that way and are now looking at themselves and saying, I was an idiot. I missed an opportunity. I could have gotten this forgiven. And then I want to remind you, student debt is only one of the 4 levels of debt that plague the American working class. Mortgage debt for your home, car payment debt for your automobile, and credit card debt for your plastic. I mean, yes, the students have a claim, but don't the other people too? I mean, let me be real honest with you as an economist. Since the 1970s, we have grown the consumption of this country. Standards of living have risen, but the wages didn't. For the first time in the history of this country, the rising standard of living which we enjoyed wasn't paid for by a rising standard of wages. You know what paid for it? Credit. MasterCard, Visa, yeah, and all the rest. And now let me make clear to you what that means. Most of you that I'm talking to, your job depended on the ability of your employer to sell whatever it is your job helps produce. And the reason your employer could hire you was because your employer could sell to people who didn't have the money, but who got credit. We've all benefited from that credit. So if we're going to relieve some people of the burden, on what justification in the world could you not do that for the others? And my
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes. I think the people who run this society would like to give the students a break for not good reasons. They hope for the votes and all the rest. But they don't do it, and they won't do it. And that includes Biden, which is why he won't give more than a small amount of money, which leaves students with still a big fat burden, is because he's afraid of what I just said. He's afraid that if the rest of the people burdened by mortgage, car payments, and credit card see what those students got, you're going to see mass movements demanding parity for them. And who amongst us is going to say that that isn't justified?
Well, this kind of just happened to me. I paid off another chunk of a student loan, and then I read about how he's going to forgive. Like, what? I want my money back so that I can have the forgiveness. But what came to me is many of these borrowing institutions, be it a credit card, be it a mortgage operation, a bank, be it, and the student loan people, they're predatory, and they're worse than they're super predators. I would hesitate to say. Isn't there a way that instead of maybe forgiving across the board money, which I'm not going to say no to, President Biden, and I do really want you to do that, wouldn't there be a way to sort of curtail the predatory nature of these establishments? Maybe say, listen, everyone who took a student loan out has to pay it back, but there will be no interest rate. I mean, people aren't going to be mad about that. They'll say, what about my credit card? And then maybe we could get them to drop interest rates on credit card. There could be another way around this. What your thoughts?
There are many ways. Nobody should ever think that this is a technical problem or some kind of economic problem. It isn't. It's a political problem. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. Let me give you some examples. In many countries of the world, and at many points in American history, state governments and the federal government have taken the step of controlling interest rates. I mean with a law that says the interest rate cannot go above X percent ever for anything, end of conversation. Let me remind everyone about human history. For 1,000 years, you had European feudalism, 500 to 1500 AD. The dominant political and philosophical power in that time was the Roman Catholic Church. And one of the central doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church, and I'm not asking you to agree or disagree or endorse, but just to understand what the church did. The church said that usury, that was the word they used then, borrowing money and lending it at interest, so that you gave somebody $100 as a loan, and they had to give you back $100, say at the end of the year, plus $5 for interest. The normal, what we all understand as lending money at interest. The church said that's usury. That's not a good thing. That's very bad. God, Jesus, or however you make sense of all of that, doesn't like it and will not like you if you do it. Not only that, but at certain points in the church's history, if you do that, we will cook you, and that won't feel good either. So the church banned it. It was a sin. It was against church. Go read your Thomas Aquinas or your St. Augustine. You'll find it. And here was the reasoning of the church. A person who borrows is a person in need. You don't respond to a person in need by taking advantage of their need to say, I'll give you something, but you gotta give me more back than I give you, because that stinks as morality and we won't have it. My guess is an awful lot of people would find that reasoning kind of persuasive about how to make a community cohere. We don't take advantage of people who need. Well, once capitalism came along, in which everybody was borrowing money and investing it, they had to get rid of that. And the church had to let it go. They didn't want to, but capitalism proved stronger than them. We could have a rule that says it is immoral, which it is, to charge people 10, 20, 30%. I don't know if most of your watchers and audience are aware. The banks today that issue credit cards, they borrow money at the Federal Reserve for less than 1%. And the average interest rate they charge you on your unpaid balance on the credit card, that's in the neighborhood of 17 to 20%. You understand? The money costs them 1%. You pay them for that money 17 or 18 or 19%. By the way, that's why banks are made out of marble and occupy those impressive buildings. You're paying for that. And the law could change that tomorrow. The law could make that. Here's another way. We could have public banks in the United States, banks owned and operated by the government. You know what? Most countries have that. France has it. Italy has it. Germany has it. What's going on here? And you know what? Those banks could set the interest rates. They could say, if you come to a public bank, you can borrow at 4%. If you want to go over there to that private bank, be my guest, they'll charge you twice that. But you want to control interest rates? Real quick. In France, a country I know very well, the post office is a bank. In other words, when you go to the post office, you can do all your banking, your credit card, your savings account, your checking account, whatever your mortgage, whatever you need. The government runs it and puts it in every post office because they're already everywhere they're convenient, located in the country. So it was genius, cheap way to have banks available. Therefore, they can lend at a lower interest rate and all the privates have to go. I could go on and on for hours with the ways this could be done. So when someone tells, well, that's not workable, that is BS, and I won't say what those letters mean. I hope you know.
I'm pretty sure my audience knows that one. Professor Wolff, that's interesting. You gave us some an alternative way of looking at this. Even the right wing hasn't, as far as I've known, said something like, well, what about me, my credit card? They've really, their only talking point is this would cause hyperinflation. If we forgave people's $10,000 of people's student loan, they'd have money in their pocket, and then they'd go buy things, and then all the, it would, everything would go up. The cost of things would go up. Your thoughts about those talking points?
Yeah, I mean, many of the interests, the biggest corporations, the people made wealthy by big corporations, are funding the right wing in the United States, and they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. Few people do. So yeah, they're going to look for every kind of solution other than those that might pinch the profitability of their funders. They have been captured by their donors, which is a serious problem for all political movements and for all politicians. You just look around, you can see what I'm talking about. Now, inflation. Yes, that's become a bugaboo again, an inflation. And inflation is when all prices go up. It happens. So we're always at risk. In a capitalist economy, inflations happen. Even in non-capitalist economies, they can, but they've been particularly a problem in capitalism. So it's always relevant to say, gee, let's worry about an inflation, because it's like saying, gee, let's worry about a bad storm. Sooner or later, we're going to get one. That's not too sharp. The question is, what causes it? And here's where this noise comes. They don't like something, these right-wingers, whatever it is, the government doing this or somebody else doing that. And so they scare you. If you let this thing happen that we don't want, it's going to make a terrible inflation for you. Well, since 2008 and 9, when we had a terrible crash of capitalism, the federal government has been pumping new money into the economy on a scale we've never seen before. Every year since that started, basically 2008, when that crisis hit, every year money was printed at record rates, dumped into the economy. And every year, right-wingers and conservatives told us you mustn't do that because it will cause an inflation. You know, when Obama came into office early in 2009, he had a big boost of the money supply, and all the Republicans, inflation. We had no inflation. We had no inflation in 2009 or 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 or 14 or 15, I mean, a broken clock is correct twice a day, right? And right-wingers have about the same record. They're just using that as a scare. But you don't answer that by saying, oh, no, it can never happen. Some of my liberal colleagues respond to the right wing by giving erudite statements about how it's not going to happen. That's stupid. We don't know that. Most of the great inflations have happened when a large number of people didn't expect it, didn't have a plan for how to prevent it, didn't have a good solution for it. So when the Federal Reserve governors get up there and tell you, we know the inflation we're having now is temporary, that's a prediction of the future. The place you get that is at the carnival. And the lady tells you who you're going to sleep with in 2 weeks, and you giggle because you know that's funny. If you get all upset because you don't like her that much, then you've misunderstood what this is about. Janet Yellen is the head of the Federal Reserve. Janet Yellen and I were classmates at Yale at the same time. We have the same teachers, the same books, the same curriculum, everything. I know that she knows that an inflation is something that needs a lot of conditions to be in place before it happens. And that when it happens, it is very hard to put that genie back in the bottle. She knows that. So that if you hear statements from her or from her colleagues that we know the inflation won't get out of hand, that's this. They're hoping that's all it ever is.
I can't imagine. I mean, we talked about in a previous interview, we talked about the Fed and we talked about the environment, but it does seem like we're going to have some runaway inflation once these continued storms start to hit. And we also spoke about weather patterns changing where I live. There's a lot of growers and farms not too far away from here, and they have been unable to produce produce this summer because it's too cold. It's not sunny. It's a short growing season, and it's basically been raining the whole time and cold. I mean, I think
There's one other thing, Juliana, that your comment brings to my mind. We're reading a lot in the press right now about what are called global supply chains. And the idea here is a lot of the things we need in our economy have to come from a very long distance, and all kinds of trouble, fires, climate change, pollution, civil wars, all kinds of things, or that ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal, and all of that. And I always scratch my head. I want to remind everyone, there's a reason why the inputs to our economy don't come from Tennessee or Idaho or California or Mexico or Canada. And there's no mystery. We don't have distant, long supply chains because of some mysterious event. American corporations decided starting in the 70s that they could make more money closing down upstate New York, which used to be an industrial center,
that's
Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, all those places, and moving to Shanghai or Brazil or India, because they could make a lot more money. But you know, a side effect of that is a long supply chain. The stuff has to come from China all the way here, or from Brazil, and that can get interrupted. But they didn't care because they were looking for the profit. If you don't want to be victim of a long supply chain and of the risks, that would have to be in your calculation at the get-go. We don't do that in capitalism. We let those capitalists decide based on what's profitable for them to do it. And then they come to us now and want us to understand it's a long supply chain. Hello, where were you when this was done? You know, were you not there? Or were you out?
Yeah, what happened when I didn't see this coming. Well, I'm sorry, but people saw this environment business coming from.
And if you didn't see it coming and it's messing up the economy now, who do you think ought to pay for that? The average person who has to pay too much for their bread or their milk or their cookies or whatever else, or their appliances, or maybe you folks who made the decision that created those long supply chains.
Oh, there's always so much more to cover, Professor Wolff, and it is great to have your voice on our program, especially in what's, these very difficult times that we've been going through. So thank you so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure, Juliana, and I look forward to the next time.
I do encourage everyone watching here to follow Professor Wolff on YouTube. The show is called Economic Update. The channel is called Democracy at Work. Professor Wolff has several books out, including the latest, The Sickness is the System. I do encourage everyone to go and read those. Thanks again for joining us, Professor Wolff.
Thank you, Juliana.